Hey word nerds, Kate here, and today's words are all about the character of the fairy godmother in the Cinderella story. Now, I mentioned in my video last week that I have seen a lot of adaptations of Cinderella, probably too many. When I get bored sometimes or I need to do research, I'll just go on YouTube and Google Cinderella and see what comes up. So I've seen everything ranging from the very fantastic to the very ridiculous and everything in between. And in trying to decide whether or not I like an adaptation, I've come to realize that there's one key factor that really sells it for me, and that factor is how they handle the fairy godmother. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the fairy godmother character, especially in the Cinderella story. She's the one who comes in and makes Cinderella's dreams come true, which, you'd think is pretty great. I disagree. And the adaptations that I really love don't actually have a fairy godmother character. Most of them have the magic tree at Cinderella's mother's grave, which is more in keeping with the original story. There are, of course, a few exceptions. For example, La Cenerentola, the opera my sister was in, the fairy godmother character was actually an advisor to the prince who came in disguise to Cinderella's house before the prince arrived in order to see if there was anyone in the house who would make a suitable bride for the prince. Now, my dislike of the fairy godmother character really boils down to three main points, and some of them I can get past, but not all of them. Let me explain. First of all, there's the message that the fairy godmother sends. Now, I love a fairy tale as much as the next girl, but I really hate the idea of magic coming in and just solving every problem. Don't get me wrong, I think magic is great, if it existed in the real world, but I don't think that it should be the answer to all of life's problems like we see so often in fairy tales. Although in their defense, fairy tales just as often use magic as a tool for the evil side. A lot of people justify it by saying, well, Cinderella has deserved this magic, she is good, she is kind, she, in some stories, is kind to the poor woman who the fairy godmother is disguised as, but I just don't buy it. People outside. My second problem with the fairy godmother is her timing. Depending on which version you're watching, there might be some room for doubt, but if this fairy godmother has been watching Cinderella long enough to know that she is a good and kind soul, she should have seen the abuse she was being subjected to. So I don't understand why the fairy godmother waits for years before finally deciding to show up. But that's not my biggest problem with her. No, my biggest problem is that she finally shows up after years, and she decides that the solution to this problem is to send her to a party. Now, a lot of this depends on the adaptation you're watching. In some versions, Cinderella has already met the prince, whether she knows he's a prince or not, and she wants to see him again, which, that's a little more understandable. But in most of the versions I've seen, Cinderella just wants to go to the ball. So the fairy godmother decides to reward her goodness by sending her to a party instead of, helping her escape an abusive situation. Now yes, in the end, Cinderella does manage to escape that situation by marrying the prince, but I don't buy the fact that the fairy godmother knew that the prince was going to fall in love with her and search the kingdom for her. I'm not saying that the fairy godmother needed to poof in right after Cinderella's father died and make the stepmother and stepsisters treat her well or turn them into toads as punishment or something. But I am saying that the way she went about solving the problem seems very counterproductive. Cinderella had to suffer for years under her tyrant of a stepmother, and all the fairy godmother does is show up and say, sure, let's get you to the party. I don't know about you, but if I was Cinderella, I would be demanding a whole lot more. Which I guess is kind of the point, because Cinderella is so good and kind that she wouldn't demand more, but it just seems like such an arbitrary and pointless solution. Anyway, enough of my rant. If you're interested in more of my words, you can check out links below to my blog, Facebook page, and Twitter account. I would love to hear from you, so please comment below and let me know what you think of the fairy godmother. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and you will see me next time, word nerds.